Okay, we're live. We're live and ready to go. In some ways, I wanted to have the last slot in this Temenos session because I wanted the opportunity to listen to what my three colleagues here have said and to try and bring some of it together. The reality is that it's very, very hard to follow such incredible wisdom and experience and just the amazing presentations that you've heard. I'm very nervous. I do a lot of presenting, a lot of teaching, and a lot of training. That's my life. It's been my life for a good 15 plus years now. But for some reason, when Siraj asked me to speak at this particular conference, for some reason I became more nervous about this than almost anything else. And what happens when I get really nervous is I over-prepare. So I'm actually used to...
And you shop.
Sorry?
And you shop.
And I shop. Yeah, that's a whole other issue that we're going to come to on the last slide, actually. So I'm going to come back to my shopping in a minute. Oh, dear. Okay. So I had a conversation last night with Shri, and I said to Shri, I'm really, really nervous about this. And he said, why? He said, just go up there and be yourself. And it hadn't occurred to me. Seriously. It hadn't occurred to me that I could just show up and just be me. And he said to me, you know what, if you just show up and just be you, you'll have at least one fan in the room. So thank you, Shri. So I'm sorry if nobody else likes my presentation, but I've got a fan, so that's good. So I'm just going to start by explaining a little bit about actually why it was really hard for me to show up and be me on this occasion. And I hope you'll bear with me because this is a very personal story, and you've given me permission over the last, well, since yesterday evening and throughout this morning, to share stories, which I didn't feel able to share before. I'm very privileged to be here. You can tell by my accent that I'm not from round here, and I'm from over the pond. So I'm privileged to be here in many ways because it's a long way to come. It's time out of my job. Siraj has helped to make it possible for me to be here, and I'm very grateful for that. And it's a great opportunity. But I'm also really privileged to be here because I had an accident last year when I was on a business trip in Sao Paulo in Brazil. And it was quite a nasty accident. I slipped and twisted, which is something that's actually quite hard to do at the same time. So if you practice it, it's actually quite hard. It's the only kind of thing you can only do by accident. And if anybody's squeamish, now would be a good time to leave. I dislocated my left patella, my kneecap. And I broke a piece of cartilage and bone off from the back of the kneecap. And it was very, very frightening and very traumatic because I was in a foreign country and I speak not a word of Portuguese. It was doubly frightening because actually I was locked in my hotel room when it happened on my own. And I had to drag myself across the floor with my kneecap dislocated to be able to phone for help. I was then 2 hours without any pain relief. Yeah. They have this, is anybody here from Brazil? Can I just see any show of hands at all? So I was told when the ambulance turned up that the system in Brazil is not, I was told it's not like it is in the UK where your paramedics can treat you on site. And in the UK we've specialized in paramedic service that can treat you right on site. In Brazil, the ambulances are supposed to carry doctors, and the doctors are the only people who can administer drugs. On that particular occasion, the doctor was upstate at a conference. That was my bad luck. So I was taken to hospital and then given the drugs in hospital. But my colleague who was with me, and she was really, truly wonderful to me, she had recently returned to working for me from being on a period of maternity leave. And she said to me, Fiona, she said, childbirth or in your pain? She said, I'd take childbirth any day. So anyway, long story short, after staying in hospital for a few days in Brazil, I was then flown back to the UK and operated on. in our great National Health Service in the UK. So just a plug for, accessible healthcare, free at the point of delivery. But because I'd been immobilized for quite a long period of time, I then couldn't bend my knee. And I was a long time having physical therapy, it really struck a chord with me when Cliff was reciting the If poem by Rudyard Kipling earlier. Because this is a poem that I was introduced to when I was quite young by my father, who has read all of Rudyard Kipling's books, and his country retreat was not very far from where I grew up, so it's a National Trust property, and we went and visited it when I was growing up. So I love the If poem, and it speaks volumes to me in very many walks of life. And every single day when I was having to cope with trying to get back to work, putting my life back together again from a place of where it had fallen apart, I was reminding myself of the If poem. And I was putting myself through grueling physical therapy exercises every day of the week for quite a long period of time. Now we're more than a year on from that accident. I'm back to running, which is really great, doing lots of exercise and activity and being the active person that I am. So I'm very grateful for all of those things that have come together to bring me here. But interestingly, one thing that I really learned was a systems issue, which was that my problems with my knees have actually been around for quite a long time. In fact, they go back to the day I was born, because I was born with hip dysplasia, colloquially known as a clicky hip in the UK, where the hip joint just isn't properly formed. And it's a very common occurrence in newborn babies. And it was treated at birth, and in 1973, when I was born, nobody really thought too much about it, and I guess the treatment wasn't terribly sophisticated. But I learnt in the last year that everything is joined together in your body. Who knew? The medical profession doesn't let you think that, right? Okay, the medical profession would have you think that your head's completely separate from any other part of your body. I hadn't realized that there was this thing that my physical therapist called the kinetic chain, which is from your lower back right down to your ankles, and that's what helps you move. It's why it's called the kinetic chain. And I hadn't realized that my hips would affect my knees. Okay? So really interesting, and a real education in terms of systems thinking with regards to the body, which I think picks up really well on what Miriam was talking about earlier. So there are lots of things that I could bring together from everything that I've heard just in the short space of time that I've been here already. One of the things that I really wanted to talk a bit about, and I was originally going to talk about this from a systems thinking perspective. Okay, this was my over-planning. And then I started to really listen to what people were saying. And what I was starting to hear was that women in leadership is an issue about space. It's not an issue about systems, although systems play a part of that. And if I've got time, I'll just run through some bits and pieces that I've got on the slides. But basically, it's more of a space issue. And one of the questions that I want to ask you is, how can you create a space for the women in your lives to think about what they want and to be able to plan their lives? Because this is what I do. So I work at King's College London, and King's College London is one of the world's top 20 universities, depending on which set of league tables ranking tables you are going to refer to, but we like to think we're in the top 20. It's a very old university, and it's a very large university. So it's large by UK standards. We have 6,500 members of staff, and we have over 20,000 students. And our campus is right in central London. So if you've ever been to central London and you've walked along the Strand where some of the theatres are, and you've gone to Trafalgar Square, you've been right near where we work, because we have a building that faces right onto the Strand. We have very little space. Space in central London, buildings in central London are really, really expensive. We can't just acquire a new building because we just couldn't afford to do so of the magnitude that we really need. In addition, most of our buildings, because King's is 150 years old, most of our buildings are what we call listed. Most of them are grade 2 listed, which means that you can't do anything to the outside of the building. So you can change some things inside to some of them, but not others. So we can't just build a new floor on top either, or extend out that way. We have to work with the space that we have. So this issue of space was something that really sort of got to me, because I think there's physical space and there's mental space, but in a light-hearted way, I was amused by the irony of space, because space is something that we find really contentious at King's. And I guess if any of you have worked for a university or been in a university culture, you probably have had contentions about space yourselves, particularly in terms of car parking space. That's usually the one that gets people the most. At King's, they did this really easily. We don't have any car parking space. Everybody gets the tube. Okay, so I wanted to talk a bit about a friend of mine, and I've anonymized her, so her name's not Emma, actually, but I'm going to call her Emma right now. And Emma is somebody I work with, and she's also become a very, very good friend. She's one of the most amazing, talented, gifted, educated women I've ever had the privilege to meet. Oh, and she's really nice, too. Doesn't that just really, great? She's a fully qualified medic. Her parents are also medics and incredibly successful. And she's recently completed a PhD working with somebody who is the foremost researcher in that particular field. And she does a part-time academic role where she teaches and does research, and then she has a part-time clinical role. And that's very common in UK universities which have a teaching hospital attached to them and medical education, which King's does. So it seems like she has everything. She not only has that, she also has 2 children and a really supportive husband and 2 great dogs. Okay? And she and her husband have just recently designed and built their own house, which is also relatively unusual in the UK because of the space issue. So it seems like she has everything. Over the past year, between the 2 of us, we've created a number of spaces for conversations about what it is we really want to do. And what became quite apparent in those conversations was that she had not made some of those decisions based on what she really wanted to do. There were lots of voices in her head. There was a lot of clutter, which was something I was hearing Susan talking about this morning. And we went through a process within those conversations where she was clearing out that clutter. And she was creating a space to think about what it was she really wanted to do. And she quit her job. Now, that was her decision. It was absolutely not influenced by anybody else around her. And in fact, she went through a really tough process, which I think probably resonates with Cliff's polarity thinking, where it was upside, downside, the whole thing. And she was really trying to work this through in her own mind. Now, this is really interesting for me because within the university I work in, there is a lot of drive to get women into leadership positions because women are significantly underrepresented at the senior levels within the university. So we're very good at taking in 50% female students. In fact, in our PhD programs, we have 51% female students and 49% male, okay, across the disciplines. In terms of the science, technology, engineering, maths, and medicine disciplines, which we call collectively the STEM disciplines, which are the main ones which have inequalities in male and female researchers and then faculty, we're quite evenly balanced at the researcher level, at PhD level, and then at postdoctoral research staff level. But once you start to progress onto a lecturer post, which would be where you guys would refer to tenure, but tenure doesn't really exist in the UK anymore. And then up to professorial level, so we go lecturer, senior lecturer, reader, and then professor, and those are grades, they're different sort of grades. By the time you get to professorial level, the women have significantly dropped off. And there have been a lot of questions raised. So King's is not the only university that this happens in, but it's representative of the research-intensive universities in the UK, the really big ones. And we're asking a lot of questions within King's at the moment about what's going on here. But for me, the issue is much less of one about women's progression and much more of one about why women are not doing what they want to do. And I think this is something where we need to progress from the concept that equality is good for us, even supposing you can define what equality is. Okay? Now, there's lots of research that says that when you have women in board-level positions, the companies do better. There's been recent research which shows that the companies that have recovered most quickly from the recent recession have had increased numbers of women in leadership positions. And that's fantastic. But it's also a pressure. So this, I think, comes back to the polarity thinking, which is, on the one hand, this is really good stuff. I make it a part of my life, my container, my space, to stand up for women in leadership positions. But I'm increasingly wanting to stand up for women's freedom of choice to do what they want to do, away from the pressures that other people put on them. Some of the pressures that I've been thinking about, so I'm going to skip through this because I'm kind of not talking to the slides. This was my over-preparation. So just bear with me while I skip through it. These will be up on the web for you to go back and look at anyway. So this is something that we're doing, an initiative that we're doing within universities in the UK, which is the Athena Swan Charter Mark. And this is funding, future research funding is going to be dependent on the progression of women in those disciplines, in the STEM disciplines. But it worries me that we are putting pressure on women to progress in their careers when that might not be the choice that they want to make. Now, it might well be the choice that they want to make, and part of the work that I do in training, developing, and coaching women within King's is actually to create that space so that they can make that choice for themselves. And when you deal with people who have PhDs, who are academics, they are very, very intelligent people. But they are also very driven, and they are also frequently perfectionists. And I think that really links in with something that Jennifer was talking about which part of yourself are you talking from. And I'm going to use that model when I'm coaching, to take that back and say, which part of yourself are you speaking from? And 9/10 of the time, if I'm asking them when they say they want to proceed to higher positions in academia, they would be talking from the perfectionist part of themselves. They would be talking from the voices in their head which belong to other people. And what I want to do is to create a space where they can make those decisions for themselves. And that's what we were able to do with Emma. And this is what we do at King's when we work with researchers. So I head up a department which does this with PhD students, with postdoctoral research staff, and some early career academic staff. So we want to try and get them on the path. Societal perceptions and norms are another thing that put a lot of pressure onto women. So you might recognize somebody in that picture up there. And I'm wondering what went through your head as an assumption when you saw that picture. Okay? Oh, isn't Fiona lucky? Look at that lovely baby boy that she's got, et cetera, et cetera. What a great son. I don't have any children. That's my nephew. Okay? And what is it about that picture that would mean that I couldn't do the leadership sketch on the other side, so assuming that the yellow blob person is a leader? Okay, we make perceptions and assumptions in society which put tremendous pressure on people. And in particular, it puts pressure on women. So we need to be aware of that. Family structures, organizational structures as well, also put pressure on women to make certain decisions which might not be the right decisions for them. And I think that the most important thing that we can do is to create a space for women to really be themselves and to be validated. I heard about this just before I came away, and I wanted to just flag this with you because I believe this started in the US. Sorry. This is actually a front page of a UK newspaper, and it's talking about about young girls posting videos of themselves on YouTube and posting the question, "Am I pretty or ugly?" It's really horrible. This is horrific because the comments that they're getting in return are appalling, are really appalling, really seriously abusive. In any other walk of life, we would not tolerate that. But what worries me more is what is going on with those teenage girls, that they feel they have to present themselves like that in the first place. Okay? Where are the spaces for them in their schools to feel validated, to understand what part of themselves they're talking to identify their own particular gifts and talents and abilities, which are not necessarily to do with the way that you look or indeed your brain. I'm being moved on here. Okay, so essentially, essentially the key question is the one I asked at the beginning. I'm committed to creating spaces for women to find out what it is they want to do. And I would ask you to ask yourselves, what are you doing to help the women in your lives create that space to find out what it is that they want to do away from the clutter and away from the systems, influences that they have around them. So thank you very much for listening to me.